John Grom, and welcome to our 211th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel will discuss immigration with all of its subtle and not so subtle aspects. Today's panel begins with Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. Tom Finley, retired vice president of Rubbermaid Incorporated. And Patty Haskins, former member of the Wadsworth City Council. Bryan, it appears to many people that the southwestern border of the United States is wide open to all comers. The president and members of his cabinet insist that it is closed and under control. What does it look like to you?
Well, I thought we could start with some information. I went to the Council of Foreign Relations website. They're a nonpartisan think tank based in New York. Hopefully everyone agrees that they're nonpartisan, that they're just not out there throwing firebombs at immigration, all that kind of stuff. And they had some very interesting statistics that I thought I could share to give us maybe all a little better understanding of what we're facing.
Are you talking about, you really want to talk about facts?
Yes, I'd like to start out with facts, and then we can get into fiction.
Okay, very good.
Okay. First, immigrants make up about 14% of our population, about 45 million people. When you include their U.S.-born children, that number goes up to 26%. So obviously, some people don't understand that when someone comes to this country and has a child here, that child is considered a U.S. citizen. So we want to make sure that's clear. They're not dreamers, okay? Dreamers are children that have come here as minors with undocumented parents, or they've come by themselves and they've made it to this country. That's the dreamers, okay? They weren't born here. In 2019, Mexico was the most common country that immigrants were coming from, and most of them came here for work-related reasons. Since 2013, South American countries have surpassed Mexico. They're actually now about 24% of the immigrants come from Central American countries. And they're mainly coming here for political asylum, not for work, but for asylum. India makes up 6%, China 5%, and the Philippines 4.5%. Those are the three other largest contributors to immigration. There are approximately 11.4 million undocumented immigrants in our country, okay? And most of them have lived here over 10 years, okay? So the uproar that took place over the years, because this has been a political football that we've been kicking back and forth, no one seems to have the political will to put a comprehensive plan in place that addresses all of the issues that were faced with undocumented people coming into the country, establishing work. They get a social security number, whether that's legal or not, a legal social security number or not, and they worked here. They have a family. Currently, under current U.S. immigration law, when you're undocumented, you have to leave the country and then come in legally. And I guess some of the issues around this, and people like to throw around the word amnesty, okay, that people that have been here, have raised a family, that we would give them amnesty so that they wouldn't have to leave the country and come back. So that's one issue that most people really bristle over, that somehow these people have come here through the back door and they need to come in the front door, but there's no pathway for them. And most of these have children that have been born here, okay? They've never lived anywhere but here, okay? So in essence, you would be separating the family. Now, one of the issues, let me just go on, in May of 2022, this May, Customs and Border Protection apprehended 239,000 people coming across our southern border. the most that's ever happened in 20 years.
Is that in
Now,
1 month?
That's the month of May, just the month of May. In 1 month, they apprehended 239,000. And even the Biden administration recognizes that this is a real problem. So different administrations have had different ways of looking at it. Everybody focuses on the Trump administration, but I'd like to focus on the Obama administration because the Obama administration was the last administration that deported more people than the George Bush and Bill Clinton administrations combined. Okay. It was in 2013 when there were several 100,000 undocumented minors from South America that came to this country, and they were held in, I want to use a neutral term. They were held in what people would consider camps on our southern border, and they were provided with as much support that we could give them because they were overwhelmed. Okay. And it was the Biden administration, the Obama administration that put these camps together, and they, did their very, very best. It wasn't until Donald Trump was made the president that all of a sudden these camps that were put in place in 2013 got all the media attention. If you remember the pictures of kids in cages and, eating these overcrowded cafeterias and all that kind of stuff, that had been going on since 2013. So I want to dispel this myth that somehow Donald Trump and the Trump administration, those evil people, just did all this stuff. It was in place. Donald Trump also reinstated some of Obama's immigration policies as far as staying in your country and applying for political asylum in the country of your origin so that our courts aren't overwhelmed. Currently, our immigration courts have a 1.4 million case backlog of cases of people seeking political asylum. And how it works is when a minor comes to this country, the policy is that we don't send them back, that they are able to receive a hearing through our immigration system as to whether or not they will be granted political asylum. So we have been swamped with minors, mostly young men, some young women, that have come to this country seeking political asylum. And that's another issue that gets being bandied about. But the Obama administration put in place a very well thought out plan that these political asylum seekers would seek political asylum in the country of origin. And most of the countries agreed to that. Mexico, being one of them, said, hey, we've got a bunch of them sitting here in our country. Why don't you set up some satellite offices and we'll go ahead and do them here instead of sending them to this country. So that's basically the basis of the issue that we have. Another issue is sanctuary cities. And we just saw the governor of Texas and Florida have been sending busloads of people that they are supposed to be taking care of with limited funds that stretch their resources to places like New York City. They sent 50 to Martha's Vineyard. And if you've never heard of Martha's Vineyard, I've never been there. I can't afford to live there over the summer. But it sent those people in an apoplectic tailspin. What were they going to do with 50 immigrants that were dropped off in Martha's Vineyard? So they called out the National Guard, and the National Guard collected them and sent them to an army base where they now sit waiting for their hearings and all that kind of stuff. So there's a whole host of issues around this. I hope that maybe we can come up with some sort of solutions. I'm basically for a pathway for people that have lived here, these dreamers that have come here. They've never really known their country. There needs to be a solution that is amenable to all and takes into account the humanitarian aspects of this and not just the inflammatory, Trump did this, that, or the other, all that kind of stuff. There's got to be a solution because we can't continue doing and going down this road as we are now. The border states are stretched thin. I won't get into that. It's unbelievable what we've asked Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, and California to do in absorbing this just an amazing amount of immigrants. And the Biden administration is doing their best. But when you have 239,000 come to our border, through our southern border in May alone, that would swamp anyone's system. So that's my opening remarks.
Okay, well, Ron, what are your opening remarks?
Bryan, thank you so much for this perspective. Very, very, very nicely done. You kept most of your political bias out of it. Thank you. Folks, I don't have a lot of input here, really. I'm disturbed by it. I'm distressed by it. I think we as a country have an ethical we need to do this. We have an ethical ultimatum, really, to help provide to take in people, political asylum, or that sort of thing. Especially looking at the genocide our European ancestors inflicted on the native population here. There should be a little bit of guilt here, but yeah, I don't know. I don't have for that. I will welcome the immigrants. I hope we could take care of them. I realize that our system is obviously completely overwhelmed here. We haven't had the resources to be able to put here to help these folks, both for political and humanitarian reasons. There's certainly been cases where some things have. I know one case in Michigan, for example, where a gentleman from one of the Eastern European countries was being made to leave. His wife, however, had I believe it was cerebral palsy, and he was here. He was helping her under humanitarian reasons, and they took sanctuary in a church in Detroit. A friend of mine is a member of that church, and he was there. We were there for a couple of years, the whole family, until he finally received a sort of amnesty. He was allowed then to stay and take care of his ill wife. So things like that happen, and things like that probably should happen on an individual basis. Nothing wrong with that. I'm sorry that there is so much political unrest in Central American countries sending people here. Probably the governments in those countries aren't going to be really amenable to having their citizens come apply for sanctuary in another country. Do we even still have embassies active in Venezuela and so forth? I don't know. That's obviously where it should happen. So I don't have a solution for this. I see there are many border walls. I don't think are the answer. Or technological surveillance of the border, perhaps to try to catch folks. Drone technology and that sort of thing can be put on to try to do that. There are all sorts of ways of trying to enforce it that are happening or not happening. People are dying, crossing the border, coming into the desert. That shouldn't be. It's got to be better than sending them back to Mexico or something. Obviously, we're overwhelmed, whether it's an internment facility, a camp, or a refugee center set up. Probably some of all of these things have to happen, but obviously the numbers are astounding. The numbers are just astounding, and I don't know. It's maybe a little bit different than the end of the 19th century when large boatloads full of immigrants were coming in from Europe who were being processed through New York City. Maybe we had more resources then. Maybe we had more space to put them, send them off to Minnesota or somewhere to be farmers. But
which they did. In fact,
which they did.
I think the largest source of immigrants into this country historically has been Germans. But I got a question for you, Ron. How did you feel about Bryan's comments being in favor of citizenship for the Dreamers?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, did it surprise you that Bryan would support that?
No, not really. Bryan is a decent human being. Why would he not? Why would he not support that?
Thank you, Ron.
Okay, excuse me, I think Tom is next, right? And Tom, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say I have not been concerned, interested in, informed very well on this topic whatsoever. I've taken it pretty much for granted, and shame on me for that. So it's ignorance as I approach this whole situation, and with a bit of surprise, quite frankly, on how well it has been managed, since it's rather chaotic and undefined as to any direction. My overall thought is we need them and they need us. I don't think we should put our head in the sand about the fact that the need for workers, the need for quality people in this country still is there. And our ability to absorb is there if we put the machinery in place and the resources in place to manage it. So I don't think it has been well managed. I don't find fault with anybody for doing so. It's not been a priority, or it's not been a serious problem, except for those states that have been directly involved in absorbing them. So it seems to me that the first thing is to get an order is, well, what is the process? What should be the process for handling immigration into this country? The first thing would be to agree that we need immigrants coming into this country.
Are you thinking primarily of our labor shortage?
I'm thinking there will always be a labor shortage in this country. I hope there will be, at any rate.
Oh.
And that labor should come from any and all directions, internal and external.
Yeah. Patty, what are your thoughts?
I enjoyed listening to everyone today. The very reason-tempered statements. You know, immigration is not something that has just recently become a problem. You know, it goes back all the way to the beginning of the 20th century. You know, of course, originally with the country, anyone could come to the country, and it wasn't until later in the 1900s that the quota system was set up so that those that legally wanted to come to the country, which is what everyone wants people to do, is to immigrate legally. It's become more and more difficult for people that have, for some reason, a need for asylum to actually legally immigrate into this country, and particularly from certain countries. We have decided that certain countries are good and certain countries are bad. The America First.
Excuse me, Patty, do you mean as a source of immigrants?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. For example, it was thought, and I know that President Trump had said this, but it was not a new idea, that the Northern Europeans were preferred over Southern Europeans as far as coming into the country and who we wanted to allow. But this was exacerbated, of course, by the quota system. It was exacerbated by the America First organization back in the mid 20th century that only wanted certain people to come in, and really not that many, because we wanted to keep America American. You know, this led
What the heck does that mean?
Well, for example, you know, during the 1940s, 30s, and 40s, when European Jews were attempting to flee Germany, to flee Poland, to flee from other countries that were being overrun by Hitler, they were denied access into the United States, and boatloads, and there are cases where boatloads of immigrants were turned away and sent back to their country. For many of them, it simply meant that they were going back to their death because of this fear of allowing, at that time, it was anti-Semitism that was causing it, fear of allowing more Jews to come into country. This country has some really good stories to tell about immigration, as we were founded by immigrants, but it has some rather tragic stories of things that have happened. You know, fast forward to today, we are seeing most of our immigration coming illegally through the southern border, and it's from a lot of different countries. I agree with I don't want immigration to be just anybody who wants to walk in can walk in. That's not good for the country. It's not safe for the country. But, you know, as everyone has stated, we do need to do more to at least come to some kind of agreement on how to handle the enormous numbers. As Bryan said, it was in May was the largest number. And I think that total has gotten worse the last few months in the number of people or immigrants that have come through. The only thing that has been done so far to kind of stem that, I think that, if I'm not mistaken, it's Venezuela. The government has reinstated the stay in Mexico policy for, I think it's Venezuela, but only Venezuela, not for other countries.
Why do you suppose that is?
I'll be honest with you. I think a lot of it's just simply, I don't want to admit that something that Trump did was right. I mean, that's the only reason I can think of why, if you're going to do it for Venezuela, you perhaps need to do it for other countries. But what we're running into in Congress is nobody wants to agree with the other guy. Nobody wants to say that your policy might work, or maybe we can work something out together. I mean, they need to accept that immigration can be legitimate, and there can be political people that are coming here for political asylum. But we have to agree on things that we can do. You know, we first have to deal with, I think we should legalize the status of the dreamers within the United States. Secondly, I think that we need to address the fact that if we are going to grant political asylum, we need to provide help for the courts, the asylum courts that see these people, so that we don't have a 1 million person backlog. Now, that can mean more judges, more courts, but that's something we need to do that could correct this problem. We need to increase the security at the border, provide more support to the Border Patrol. Part of the problem, though, is not that they don't want to provide it, but they can't get people to do the job. They've had, just like with all law enforcement, we're seeing across the country, numbers are down, and the people that are actually applying for the job, retirements are up. People are just leaving the job to find some other career. So we don't have a full complement of people to enforce issues on the border. Now, this shouldn't be a right or left issue. This should be something that we do for the country, and we should be able to get together and come up with some, legitimate immigration reform policies that work for the best of the country, but yet recognize the need for legal immigration, and recognizing the fact that there are people that need to come to this country to save their life, and we need to accept them, not turn them away like we did in the 30s to those coming from Europe.
Let me bring up as well. Between 2010 and 2018, individuals who overstayed their visas outnumbered those who arrived illegally.
That
So
doesn't surprise me. Yeah, that's going on a lot. Yeah.
And they never, and they're here.
They get a work visa or a student visa, then
and they
come
overstay
to the
their
country.
visa.
And as long as they're not causing problems, nobody notices it.
Right.
So,
right.
And it takes a long time. We had a minister a couple of years back. She was Canadian, and to get a green card here, it took a year or two with the help of an attorney to get that in place for her. She's since gone back to Canada, but it was just a tortuous sort of system. And
Yeah.
there is the political will thing. I just reading this morning about the some highlights from a town hall between Ryan and Vance in Columbus yesterday, and the immigration was one of the hot topics. And for example, Vance would like the wall. Ryan says no. We need just better surveillance. And Vance says, well, we need to have a merit system. And Bryan did not address that. At least in the report, he didn't address that. So there are good things on both sides, I'm sure. And to get Congress together is, it's just increasingly difficult.
My thought is if these numbers are right and someone has lived here for 20 years and has a family and they don't have their documents in order, that is, we have to, take that all into consideration and say they've stayed out of trouble. They've paid their taxes. They've been contributing members of society. Let's put them on the pathway, not a 10-year pathway or a 5-year pathway, but let's make it so they can.
Isn't that pretty much what Reagan did? That the left accused him of providing amnesty to all the illegals.
He did, and 3 million. They basically, identified 3 million people. That's something that's in this brief that I read. That Reagan was the last president, to do that. And he worked with Congress and all that kind of stuff. So when they can't get it, then they start doing these executive orders. That's what creates the problem. You can't get it into law. But we can't just keep kicking this football around. I mean, people are suffering.
And we have to look at the legal immigration system itself. Because it takes too long. I mean, everyone says, it sounds really simple. Do it legally. That's great. But if it's going to take 10 years, which it does in some cases, 10 years, you can't afford, if you're trying to save your children, save your family, you can't afford to sit in that country for 10 years and wait for these slow wheels of justice to turn.
And the average cost is anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000.
Wow.
And the average time is anywhere from 3 to 7 years to do it legally. So these are people that came here, they were brought, let's say they were brought here from another country. They have a green card, they've been working here, and they decide we'd like to stay.
Well, we've run out of time for this section of our program. That in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about the weaponization of government. So you might want to think about that. But in the meantime, a hearty farewell. See you in 2 weeks.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.